The sun hung low over the Sicilian hills, turning the jagged rocks of the valley into molten bronze. Corporal Frank "Hawk" Henderson lay flat on his stomach behind a crumbling boulder, eyes scanning the German positions below. His rifle rested lightly in his arms, the sand whisper trigger pack glinting faintly in the dying light. A thin layer of fine sand and gun oil coating the trigger assembly, muting the familiar click of the firing mechanism. Henderson's breath formed tiny clouds in the cool air, and every muscle in his body felt taut with anticipation. The valley was quiet, almost unnervingly so. The Wehrmacht spotters were out there somewhere, tucked behind rocks, scanning the ridges for movement, for any hint of Allied soldiers. One misstep, one misfired shot, and he would be a sitting duck. He adjusted the rifle, feeling the familiar stability of the Springfield in his hands. The sand pack made it almost eerie. He could pull the trigger, fire, and hear nothing beyond the faintest whisper. No echo, no metallic click. It was untested in combat, considered reckless by some officers, but tonight it would prove its worth. A pair of spotters moved along the ridge, their helmets catching the last rays of sunlight. Henderson's pulse quickened. He exhaled slowly, letting the rifle settle against his shoulder. He was a shadow among shadows, the rocks, dirt, and sand all blending into one seamless camouflage. Time stretched as he watched the men below. Every rustle of grass, every soft click of boots on stone could betray them, but the sand whisper trigger kept his own actions silent. He could take aim, adjust the sight, and squeeze the trigger without the usual mechanical warning that would ripple through the valley. One of the spotters crouched behind a small boulder, adjusting binoculars. Henderson's finger brushed the trigger lightly, testing the weight, the subtle resistance under the sand. He exhaled again, slow, controlled, counting silently. 1, 2, 3. The first shot was almost ceremonial in its silence. The spotter's head jerked violently, and then he slumped forward, his binoculars clattering to the stone. Henderson barely moved, letting the cradle of his arms absorb the recoil, the rifle settling silently back into position. No sound carried down the valley. No one else seemed to notice. He exhaled a small, grateful breath and scanned for the second target. The other spotter had paused, probably hearing something, some instinctive feeling that something was wrong, but he couldn't place it. Henderson tracked him, lining up the shot carefully. Crack! The man fell backward, rolling down a small incline. Henderson adjusted slightly, eyes already seeking the third. A shadow moved near a rock outcrop, the final observer. His pulse was steady now, the rhythm of the rifle, the cradle, and the sand pack synchronizing with the rhythm of the storm clouds that were beginning to gather over the valley. Henderson's thumb brushed the safety, then eased it off. The final shot would be crucial. Too slow and reinforcements might notice, too fast and he might miss. He focused, heart quiet, mind sharp. The valley was alive with anticipation, though the air was still. The last spotter peeked, scanning the opposite ridge. Henderson inhaled, tightened his grip, and squeezed the trigger. Crack! The man dropped silently, face first into the dirt, arms spread as if reaching for something unattainable. Henderson exhaled fully for the first time in minutes, letting his chest relax against the boulder. 3 spotters gone, not a single echo to betray his position. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind rattling loose stones and the soft patter of the sand sliding against his rifle. Henderson allowed himself a small, grim smile. The sand whisper trigger pack had done exactly what he hoped. It had kept him hidden, precise, and lethal. He shifted slightly, peering down the valley, scanning for movement. No reinforcements yet, no immediate danger. But he knew the Wehrmacht wouldn't stay idle. They would notice the missing spotters soon enough, and then the hunt would begin. For now, he stayed low, the rifle resting silently in his arms. Every instinct screamed for patience, every muscle tensed in readiness. The sand, the rifle, the valley, they were all part of the equation. He had the advantage, and he wasn't about to let it go. Lightning flashed briefly behind the ridges, illuminating the valley, then gone. Henderson exhaled, adjusting the Sand Whisper trigger pack again, ensuring it was perfectly aligned. The night was coming, and with it, new challenges. But for now, the first stage of the mission was complete. Henderson knew this was only the beginning. The silent weapon, the ingenuity of a soldier willing to bend the rules, had given him the edge. And in Sicily, 1943, sometimes the smallest innovation could mean the difference between life and death. The valley darkened rapidly as the sun dipped behind jagged cliffs, shadows stretching long across the rocks. Henderson didn't move. He pressed his chest flat against the boulder, listening. Every rustle of leaves, every drip of water from the sandstone cliffs, every faint shuffle of boots could mean detection or opportunity. He shifted slightly, sliding the rifle forward in his arms, letting the Sand Whisper trigger pack absorb the motion. The layer of sand mixed with gun oil glinted faintly, invisible in the dim light, but essential. Any sound here, in this silent, stone-carved valley, would carry far. One metallic click, one echo, and his position could be betrayed. Movement. A flash of a helmet. Henderson froze. 3 more Wehrmacht soldiers were moving toward the spot where their comrades had disappeared. They weren't running. They were cautious, methodical, scanning the valley with suspicion. Henderson's pulse stayed low. He counted silently. 1, 2, 3. Each man moved in a staggered line, testing for a trap. The Sand Whisper trigger pack allowed him to line up shots without fear of revealing the sequence. He had tested it countless times in practice, but now, in combat, its value was undeniable. The first soldier paused behind a jagged rock, peering toward the ridge. Henderson exhaled slowly, letting the rifle settle in his arms. Crack! The soldier toppled silently, landing in a small pile of dust and stone. The second man froze, startled, but couldn't locate the source. Henderson adjusted, keeping the cradle steady. Another squeeze, and the second fell without sound. The third soldier hesitated, crouching low, realizing his 2 comrades were gone. He tried to move sideways, looking for cover, and Henderson followed the motion. Crack! Down he went. Henderson didn't move. The Sand Whisper trigger pack had done its job. 3 more potential eyes for the Germans eliminated, without a single echo to betray the ridge. His eyes scanned the valley carefully. No other movement. No reinforcements. Yet. He exhaled and rubbed the side of his face against the boulder, feeling the slick mud and sand. His body ached, tension coiled in every muscle, but he couldn't relax. The Wehrmacht would send more, and they would be looking for the pattern, for the phantom sniper who struck without warning. Lightning flashed, illuminating a distant ridge. Henderson caught a shadow moving in the corner of his eye, someone climbing cautiously toward the edge, likely to get a better view. He didn't flinch. He simply shifted the rifle slightly in the cradle, the recoil absorbed perfectly. Crack! The figure toppled silently. The storm overhead intensified, the rain masking the soft movements of additional soldiers. Henderson allowed himself a small, grim smile. The innovation dismissed by his own officers as reckless, the Sand Whisper trigger pack, had allowed him to neutralize 6 spotters without revealing a single hint of his position. The quiet of the valley belonged to him. Yet Henderson didn't allow celebration. He adjusted his cheek on the stock, scanning the terrain for more movement. The Germans would be confused, cautious, hesitant, but they would also regroup. He could feel it in the rhythm of the valley, footsteps shifting further down, subtle rustles of the undergrowth, the occasional sharp whistle to communicate. Patience, that was the key. He counted silently again, heart steady, hands light but controlled on the Springfield. One misstep, one loud sound, and it would all be over. The rain was relentless now, washing down stone and dust, filling small puddles in the valley floor. Henderson shifted slightly, checking the sand on the trigger pack. It had held firm, smooth and silent, every shot perfect. He tightened his grip, aware of the cold, the wet, and the sheer focus this mission demanded. Another shadow flickered, a movement too deliberate to be a branch or leaf. Henderson exhaled slowly, aimed carefully, and the Sand Whisper trigger pack did its work again. Crack! The figure dropped, silently joining the others in the mud. Henderson's pulse remained steady, but his body hummed with tension. The storm, the valley, and the night itself seemed to hold their breath. The ingenuity of a simple sand and oil innovation had given him the edge. 3 spotters, then 3 more, all gone, without a single echo to warn the enemy. He exhaled fully, resting the Springfield lightly against the boulder. The mission was far from over. The valley still held threats, and more Germans would come. But for now, the ridge was his. Henderson pressed the rifle lightly into the cradle again, scanning the shadows with methodical care. He knew that this small, unorthodox trick, the Sand Whisper trigger pack, had done something remarkable. It had made silence lethal, and in the quiet, rain-soaked valley of Sicily, he smiled faintly. The ridge, the mission, and his life had survived another night because of a simple, brilliant idea. The rain continued to hammer the rocks, filling shallow pools in the valley floor and turning the dirt to slick mud. Henderson stayed low, rifle cradled in his arms, eyes scanning every movement. The Wehrmacht spotters were gone, but he knew the valley held more than just their corpses. Reinforcements would come, and they would be cautious, but persistent. He shifted slightly, letting the Sand Whisper trigger pack absorb the motion. The subtle layer of sand and oil on the trigger allowed him to move, squeeze, and adjust without giving off even a whisper of mechanical sound. His fingers were numb from the cold, but the rifle remained steady, every shot precise, every aim silent. From the far end of the valley, a faint shadow moved along the edge of a boulder formation. Henderson counted 3 figures, moving deliberately, testing the ground, trying to locate their missing comrades. Their coordination was off, shaken by the unseen force that had struck earlier. Henderson exhaled slowly. He didn't need to move. The Sand Whisper pack allowed him to strike first without being noticed. He adjusted his grip, lining up the rifle. Crack! The first man fell into the mud. Crack! The second went down before he could react. The third soldier froze, searching for the source, unaware that the soundless rifle had already decided his fate. Crack! He collapsed silently, sliding into a shallow puddle. Henderson didn't flinch. He remained pressed against the boulder, scanning for more movement, feeling the rhythm of the storm, the rustling of the leaves, the heartbeat of the valley itself. Lightning flickered, casting brief, eerie light across the rocks. Henderson caught the movement of 2 more soldiers trying to flank the ridge. His eyes narrowed, focusing on the details. The slight sway of a uniform in the wind, the glint of metal, the rhythm of their breathing. He adjusted slightly in the cradle, lining up his shot. The recoil was absorbed perfectly by the split branches of his arms and the support of the boulder. Crack! Crack! Both fell, sliding into the mud silently. The valley was quiet again. Henderson allowed himself a breath, but it was shallow, careful. He knew this wasn't over. The remaining German soldiers would regroup, move cautiously, and search for him. They would try to bait him, to draw him out, but he had one advantage they didn't anticipate. Silence. Pure, lethal, whispering silence. The Sand Whisper trigger pack had been considered reckless by the higher-ups, too risky, too likely to jam, too unconventional. But now, in the middle of the Sicilian night, it had proven itself. 6 spotters neutralized without a single echo, without a single warning shot. He could see the fear in the shadows, sense it in the stillness that followed each strike. Henderson adjusted his body, resting the Springfield lightly in the cradle. He could feel the cold seeping into his bones, but adrenaline kept him alive, alert, aware of every whisper of movement around him. From the other side of the valley, a faint murmur. Orders shouted low, a soft rustle of movement as the Germans tried to regroup. Henderson counted silently. 5, maybe 6 men moving cautiously toward the ridge, likely scouting, likely testing the perimeter. He exhaled slowly, letting the rifle settle into the perfect alignment. The trigger pack did its work. Each squeeze of the finger caused no mechanical noise, just a silent, lethal response. Crack, crack, crack. 3 more men dropped into the mud. The rest hesitated, uncertainty spreading among them. The unseen sniper, the one who had struck so silently, had shattered their confidence. Henderson's heart rate slowed slightly, though he remained tense. The Sand Whisper trigger pack had not only saved his position, it had changed the psychology of the enemy. They were unsure, cautious, hesitant, and that gave him even more control. Rain continued to fall. The mud soaked through his uniform. The rifle remained perfectly stable. Henderson allowed himself a small, grim smile. The untested, improvised device, so often dismissed, had allowed him to dominate this small slice of the Sicilian battlefield. He pressed the rifle gently against the cradle once more, scanning shadows, anticipating movement. Reinforcements could come at any time, but for now, the ridge was his. The Sand Whisper trigger pack had proven its worth, and Henderson knew, deep in his bones, that sometimes survival didn't come from regulations or doctrine or standard procedures. It came from ingenuity, from boldness, and from understanding that silence could be deadlier than noise. Lightning flashed again over the ridge, illuminating the silent valley. Henderson exhaled, muscles coiling and relaxing, eyes scanning, mind alert. The night was far from over, but he had the advantage. And in the quiet, rain-soaked valley, that advantage was everything. Henderson shifted slightly, keeping low behind the jagged boulder. His eyes scanned every crease in the rocky slope, every shadow the fading light could produce. The valley was alive with subtle sounds, the drip of water from a crevice, the scrape of loose stone, the whisper of wind through sparse shrubs, but none of it belonged to him. He was a ghost, a shadow among shadows, and the Sand Whisper trigger pack ensured he remained exactly that. Movement flickered at the far edge of the valley. Henderson froze. 3 German soldiers were advancing slowly, deliberately, their rifles raised, eyes scanning the ridge. They had realized the spotters were gone and were attempting to locate the threat. He didn't flinch. His finger brushed the trigger, and the rifle's muted response made the slightest adjustment imperceptible. The cradle held the Springfield steady, countering even the minor tremors from his own tension. Crack. The first man slumped silently into the mud. Crack. The second fell, hands clutching at loose rocks. The third hesitated, frozen mid-step, eyes wide with disbelief. He had no idea from where the lethal, whispering shots were coming. Henderson's breathing remained steady, slow, synchronized with the rhythm of the valley. Crack! Down he went. Henderson allowed himself a brief glance at the bodies, slick with mud and rain, lying in the shadows. 6, then 3 more. His tally was growing, and the Germans' morale was crumbling. He shifted slightly, ensuring the cradle absorbed each movement, each adjustment silent and precise. Thunder rumbled overhead, masking the faint scuffle of the remaining soldiers as they regrouped. Henderson's mind raced. The enemy would attempt to flank him next, maybe from higher up the ridge or from the boulder formations to his left. He needed to anticipate, to move subtly to keep the advantage. Another shadow emerged. 2 soldiers crouched low, weaving through the rain-soaked rocks. Henderson exhaled, adjusting the cradle's alignment. The sand-whisper trigger pack made the moment effortless. The faint sand and oil mixture allowed him to squeeze the trigger without betraying his position. Crack, crack. Both fell silently, joining the others. The rain was now a heavy curtain, drumming on the rocks, on leaves, masking any faint sound he might make. Henderson felt the weight of hours in the field pressing down, muscles aching, shoulders stiff, but he couldn't afford to relax. Every second, every movement, every breath could decide the next shot, the next life-or-death moment. From the far end of the valley, a new sound, the soft, hurried whisper of boots. Henderson's eyes narrowed. Reinforcements. Likely scouts sent to investigate the missing spotters. His pulse steadied. He had time, but only seconds. He shifted slightly, letting the rifle slide perfectly in the cradle. 3 figures appeared, cautiously moving along the far ridge, scanning for the unseen sniper. Crack, crack, crack. All 3 went down before they could react. The valley fell silent again, except for the relentless rain and the distant rumble of thunder. Henderson's breathing was controlled. The sand-whisper trigger pack had done its work. 9 German soldiers neutralized silently. Not a single click, not a single echo had betrayed him. He allowed himself a brief, grim smile. The device his officers had called reckless, foolish, and dangerous had proven its worth beyond question. Each shot had been deliberate, measured, and perfectly silent, and it had turned the tide in this small, rain-soaked corner of Sicily. Lightning illuminated the valley briefly, revealing bodies scattered among rocks and mud, the aftermath of precise, silent fire. Henderson pressed the rifle lightly into the cradle once more, scanning for movement. The remaining Germans were cautious now, hesitant, fearful. They had learned something vital. There was an unseen force controlling the ridge, and it was deadly. Henderson whispered to himself, a dry, weary laugh escaping. Silent, deadly, and unbroken. The night stretched before him, long and uncertain. Reinforcements could come at any moment, but for now, he had the advantage. And in the darkness, with the storm as his cover and the sand-whispered trigger pack as his silent companion, Henderson remained a ghost, untouchable, lethal, and unrelenting. Every breath, every heartbeat, every silent squeeze of the trigger was a testament to the ingenuity of a single soldier and the quiet power of innovation in the chaos of war. The rain had become a curtain, drumming relentlessly against the jagged cliffs and pooling in the cracks of the valley floor. Henderson pressed himself flat against the boulder, body tense, eyes tracing every shadow. The storm muffled all other sound, turning the valley into a shifting maze of movement and dark silhouettes. From his perch, Henderson could see faint flashes of movement across the far ridge. German soldiers, cautious now, testing the ground, trying to locate the phantom sniper. He didn't panic. He had hours of practice in similar terrain, but never in a live firefight with the sand-whispered trigger pack. Every pull of the trigger was silent, each shot absorbed and perfectly controlled by the crude mixture of sand and gun oil. He exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease fractionally. 1, 2, 3. They moved as if unaware that their previous spotters had been eliminated. Henderson's eyes narrowed, following the rhythm of their cautious advance. Crack. The first man crumpled silently into the mud. Crack. The second toppled, rolling into a shallow pool of water. The third froze, scanning the ridge frantically, realizing too late that the invisible sniper had claimed him. Crack. Down he went, joining the others. The valley was quiet again, save for the storm. Henderson's pulse had slowed slightly, though every muscle remained coiled, ready. He scanned carefully, noting subtle shifts, a shadow moving along a broken rock formation, the faint glint of a helmet, a hand brushing against wet stone. He knew the Germans were regrouping, sending scouts, testing edges, and trying to bait him into revealing himself. He adjusted the cradle, letting the Springfield glide smoothly against his shoulder. The Sand Whisper trigger pack allowed him to fire without a single audible click, no mechanical whisper giving away his position. This simple, unorthodox innovation, dismissed by his officers as reckless, was proving its worth in every silent strike. Another pair of soldiers emerged, creeping low through the mud, trying to approach from the right flank. Henderson exhaled slowly, eyes tracking their rhythm. Crack, crack. Both fell into the wet earth, bodies sliding silently into puddles of rainwater. Henderson didn't move. The storm continued to mask any faint sound he might make. The Germans' hesitation and fear had grown. They were now cautious, hesitant, uncertain. Each silent shot further unnerved them, breaking formation and shattering morale. Lightning flashed, illuminating the ridge. Henderson caught a figure trying to peek over a rocky outcrop. He tightened his grip, aligning the rifle perfectly in the cradle. Crack. The man fell, face first into the mud, arms outstretched. The valley seemed to exhale, the storm swallowing every remaining noise. Henderson allowed himself a fraction of relief, but not too much. He knew that reinforcements could arrive at any moment, and any lapse could be fatal. He pressed the rifle into the cradle again, scanning meticulously for movement. The Sand Whisper trigger pack had allowed him to neutralize 9 enemy soldiers without alerting a single other soldier. Not a click, not a whisper, not a single echo. Each shot had been measured, precise, and utterly silent. Henderson understood the weight of what he had accomplished. In a battlefield where sound was often death, silence had become his deadliest weapon. He shifted slightly, checking the sand layer over the trigger, ensuring it remained perfectly aligned. His hands were wet and cold, but the Springfield was steady in his grip, the cradle absorbing every tremor. Henderson allowed himself a small, grim smile. The ingenuity that had seemed foolish in theory had now proven decisive in practice. From the far ridge, he could sense the German hesitation. They were regrouping, no longer advancing blindly. The shadow of fear hung over them. The knowledge that one unseen sniper could strike without warning had altered their behavior entirely. Henderson was ready for them, alert and patient, every nerve coiled like a spring. He whispered to himself, almost imperceptibly, silent, precise, unstoppable. The rain fell harder, washing the valley clean of footprints, of debris,
of evidence, but not erasing the lesson. Innovation, courage, and quiet precision could turn even the smallest advantage into survival. Henderson pressed the rifle lightly into the cradle once more, watching every shadow, every subtle movement, fully aware that tonight, in the Valley of Sicily, silence had become the deadliest weapon of all. Henderson's eyes never left the ridge. The German soldiers were regrouping, moving cautiously now, scanning for the sniper who had decimated their spotters without a sound. He could feel the tension in the valley like a living thing, a mix of rain, stone, and fear vibrating through the soles of his boots. Every step they took was measured, every glance wary. But Henderson knew they would test him eventually. He adjusted the Springfield slightly in the cradle, letting the Sand Whisper trigger pack absorb the tiniest tremors. Every motion was deliberate, every squeeze of the trigger controlled, almost ritualistic. He was a ghost in the storm, unseen, unheard, but deadly. A movement to his left caught his eye.
Two soldiers were attempting to flank the ridge, ducking low behind a cluster of rocks. Henderson's pulse remained steady. He exhaled slowly, focusing on the rhythm of their approach, timing their steps, letting the cradle guide the rifle smoothly into alignment. Crack! Crack! Both soldiers collapsed, silently joining the growing list of fallen. Henderson didn't move. The storm masked everything: the soft patter of rain, the drip of water from rocks, even the faint rustle of leaves. The Germans had no idea from where the shots came, only that the ridge had become a lethal, invisible line. Lightning flashed across the valley, briefly illuminating another figure, creeping closer to the center. Henderson adjusted his aim without hesitation. The cradle held perfectly, absorbing recoil, keeping his shots silent and precise. Crack! Down the soldier went, his body sliding into a small puddle. Henderson allowed a momentary exhale. One by one, the German reinforcements were faltering, unsure, hesitant. Fear had begun to ripple through their ranks. From across the valley, faint shouts and the soft trudge of boots indicated more movement. Soldiers searching, probing cautiously for the unseen sniper. Henderson's eyes narrowed. He had to anticipate every step, every instinctive movement, and ensure he remained the unseen arbiter of life and death in this valley. He adjusted slightly, checking the sand and oil on the trigger pack. The layer remained perfect, silent, responsive. His muscles tensed, fingers steady. Another figure emerged from behind a rock. Henderson counted silently, letting the moment stretch. Crack! Another down, silently. The storm had become a curtain, hiding the movements of both hunter and hunted. Henderson felt the weight of hours pressing down on him, but he remained alert. Every shot, every adjustment of the cradle, every pull of the Sand Whisper trigger pack had been deliberate. His presence was unseen, but his impact was undeniable. Another pair moved cautiously along a ridge, seeking vantage, scanning for the fallen spotters. Henderson exhaled, shoulders tightening, rifle aligning perfectly. Crack! Crack! Two more collapsed, silently. The remaining Germans were hesitant now, broken by uncertainty. The once confident advance had become cautious, nervous, and incomplete. Henderson's eyes scanned the valley, calculating the next move, anticipating the next approach. The Sand Whisper trigger pack had turned the impossible into reality, silence as lethal as any machine gun. The rain continued to fall, washing mud, dust, and debris down the valley. Henderson pressed the rifle gently into the cradle, scanning every shadow, every leaf, every slight movement. He was ready. The ridge was his for now. The Sand Whisper trigger pack had ensured that. He whispered to himself, a dry, determined murmur. They thought it was reckless, but it works. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the valley and the scattered figures of his enemies, frozen in hesitation, too fearful to move. Henderson's pulse remained steady. The night was far from over, but the unseen sniper had become a force that the Germans could neither see nor predict. Every silent shot, every careful pull of the trigger, had shifted the balance of this valley. Henderson allowed himself a brief, grim smile. The Sand Whisper trigger pack, dismissed by the brass as foolish, had become his greatest weapon. And in the rain-soaked darkness of Sicily, he knew one thing with certainty. Silence had never been so deadly. Henderson pressed the rifle into the cradle once more, scanning every shadow, every subtle movement in the valley. The Germans were circling cautiously, disoriented by the sudden, silent losses. He could hear the soft scrape of boots against wet stone, the whispered shouts trying to coordinate. Each sound was faint, almost lost in the downpour, but Henderson could interpret every nuance. Because he had the cradle. and the cradle was holding. He exhaled slowly, letting his muscles relax for the briefest moment while keeping his mind razor-sharp. One miscalculation, one audible click, and the phantom sniper would be exposed. But the Sand Whisper trigger pack ensured his firing mechanism betrayed nothing. No metallic clack, no echo bouncing off the rocks. Only the quiet, invisible death of precision. A flash of movement caught his eye, a group of 3 soldiers attempting to approach from the ridge. Henderson's hands were steady, the cradle supporting the Springfield perfectly. He lined up his shot. Crack, crack, crack. All 3 went down silently. Henderson didn't move. The storm masked everything, covering the faintest sounds of struggle, the sliding of bodies into the mud. He counted silently. 12 confirmed, 3 spotters earlier, then 9 advancing soldiers, all neutralized without a single echo revealing his position. The Germans froze, hesitant, unsure. Fear radiated from them, visible even through the shadows of the rain. Henderson's pulse remained calm. The Sand Whisper trigger pack had allowed him to control the rhythm of the battle entirely, dictating who would move and who would fall, all from a hidden perch behind the boulder. Lightning flashed again, revealing the valley in stark contrast. Henderson adjusted the cradle slightly, tracking a shadow attempting to flank. Crack! Another soldier down. The remaining enemy hesitated further, retreating slowly under the impression that a larger force might be lying in wait. Henderson exhaled, muscles coiled, eyes scanning the darkness. Every shot, every pause, every subtle adjustment of the cradle had worked together to create an invisible advantage. He whispered to himself, dry and quiet. Silent, precise, unstoppable. The rain fell harder, masking faint sounds, washing the mud and leaving the valley slick and treacherous. Henderson pressed the rifle lightly into the cradle, his body still, blending perfectly with the rocks and shadows. He had eliminated 15 enemy soldiers, all without a single sound to betray him. The Sand Whisper trigger pack had transformed from a dismissed, risky idea into a weapon of unparalleled stealth and lethality. The storm began to ease, leaving only the faint patter of rain and the occasional rumble of distant thunder. Henderson allowed himself a small, exhausted smile. The valley, the ridge, and the mission were intact. He had survived, unseen, unstoppable, and deadly, all because of a simple, ingenious adaptation that no one had believed in. He scanned the valley one last time. No movement, silence, victory. The Sand Whisper trigger pack had not only protected him, it had reshaped the battlefield in a small corner of Sicily. Henderson leaned back against the boulder, letting his body relax, yet remaining alert. He pressed the rifle gently once more into the cradle, feeling the comforting alignment, the perfect recoil absorption, the quiet precision. The innovation that had once been dismissed as reckless had proven decisive. Lightning flickered one final time across the valley, illuminating the scattered bodies of the fallen, the slick mud, the rain-soaked rocks. Henderson whispered quietly to himself, almost reverently, "They said it wouldn't work, but it did." The Sand Whisper trigger pack had turned silence into power, stealth into survival, and a single Marine into an unseen force no enemy could confront. Henderson exhaled, letting the storm wash over him, knowing that ingenuity, patience, and quiet determination had carried him through the valley of Sicily.